Afternoon to everyone, and welcome to Public Health's virtual education series, Wažookį, Family Conversations. I'm Renelle, public health nurse, joined by Jamie Decora, community health representative supervisor, who's going to help me moderate today's session. The goal of the series is to gather, learn, and share about Ho-Chunk culture, resources, services, and the connection to health. In public health, we focus on prevention, promotion, and the protection of the health and well-being of our communities. Health and well-being are rooted in many aspects of our lives, from our physical body, our mental health, our spirit, the environment we live in, and much more. During these sessions, we will explore topics that can impact our health and well-being. Together, we will learn about tools and resources to improve our health and the health of our communities. Today, we're happy to have Jen Baird, nurse practitioner from Ho-Chunk Behavioral Health, here to talk about seasonal depression and how we can treat it. We'll have about 45 minutes for the presentation, followed by a Q&A. Please use the chat function to enter any comments or questions for our presenter. Jamie and I will monitor the chat throughout the presentation and read the questions for our presenter at the end. You can also raise your hand and come off mute during the Q&A to ask your questions out loud. Any questions that we don't have time for, we will bring to our presenter and email back to the group. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Department of Health website and the Facebook page. Everyone, please welcome Jen Baird.
Hi, everybody. As Renelle said, I'm a family nurse practitioner for Ho-Chunk Nation Department of Health, and I primarily work in the behavioral health division, seeing patients, working with behavioral health that need medical services, or are interested in maybe trying some medications, or just don't have a medical provider and have questions. So that's kind of my role. I also do the majority of our medication-assisted treatment for substance use disorders at the House of Wellness. So that's another role. And Renelle asked me here to talk about seasonal affective disorder, seasonal depression. I am much less formal than Renelle made it sound. So if there are questions along the way, you know, it's much more interesting sometimes to have truly that community conversation, which is two-way versus just, you know, me presenting and not answering the things that most interest you or the questions that you have. Next slide, please. So I kind of broke this into 3 mini sections. So first we'll talk about what seasonal affective disorder actually is. What does it look like? How can someone tell if maybe they think they have seasonal affective disorder? The second section, I'll talk a little bit about kind of risk factors and why those are important to us, being located in Wisconsin and specifically even in an Indigenous community. And then last, I'll kind of talk about sort of treatments, what kind of treatments are available both from providers, but also just some general self-care things that people can do to help sustain their mood through the winter or during difficult times. So what is seasonal affective disorder? I find it ironic that the initials for seasonal depression are actually SAD. They spell the word sad. But it's basically depressive symptoms that either start or worsen with changes in seasons. And there actually are 2 different types. So there's a fall spring, so a fall onset, where people notice symptoms worsening in the fall months. And then sort of notice gradual improvement again in the spring and summer months. There is the opposite actually, which is a spring onset, spring to fall, where in the spring and summer symptoms worsen and then improve again in the fall. Although some of the symptoms are slightly different based on when it occurs. Fall onset by far is the most common type. Spring to fall is not quite as common. I think the biggest takeaway about seasonal affective disorder is it's really not just the winter blues. So it's more than just that sort of normalized dip in mood. It can really impact people's ability to function. It can damage their relationships if they're isolating or withdrawing from family and friends. It can impact work functions, performance. It can impact people's ability to kind of maintain their responsibilities at home. So, you know, people like to say, oh, it's just the winter blues. But really, for people that are experiencing this, it can be really significant in its impact. So I think that's why it's great we're talking about it today. So what are some of the symptoms? Because seasonal affective disorder is a form of depression, it meets a lot of the same criteria of major depressive disorder, if you've heard it called that. So feeling down or depressed, just kind of not feeling well about things, feeling sad, being tearful or crying more than usual, having low energy most days, losing interest, especially in things that you used to enjoy. So for someone who has been a crafter, if they suddenly just put away their craft and are no longer doing those things, trouble sleeping, most of the time, this looks like sleeping too much. So kind of that chronic fatigue. Doesn't matter how early you go to bed, doesn't matter how long you sleep, you're still tired. You might feel like you need naps during the day. There is a rare sort of opposite that we're going to talk about with that spring onset, where people can become sort of overactivated, which means they start having insomnia and can't sleep. But for the fall onset, it is much more likely that people are having hypersomnolence, we call it, sleeping too much, always still tired. Overeating and weight gain. I find it somewhat ironic that this is in here, because for many of us who are having large family gatherings that are around meals, I tend to eat a lot more during the holidays, and it's not necessarily tied to my mood. So some of these things we have to look at in context, but typically you're going to see that more frequent, constant appetite, maybe snacking all the time, eating more than usual. Because they're tired, they're less active, so they might have additional weight gain. Another thing is depression can impact your mental abilities, so being able to concentrate. So if you are at work, it might be hard to focus on getting your day-to-day tasks done or sustaining that focus for prolonged periods of time. You might move or speak more slowly. So we call those like motor and speech delays, where you just are so kind of slowed down that you're just not kind of yourself. Feeling hopeless, worthless, or having feelings of guilt. I feel bad that I'm not able to do these things for my family. I feel like I'm a failure because I'm not able to do my job at work. Having thoughts of suicide or other self-harm thoughts. And as I kind of said, some of these symptoms can be different for fall onset versus spring. Because fall is so much more common, that's kind of where I'm focusing and emphasizing these symptoms. But for those that do have spring onset, you might see overactivation. So they might have trouble sleeping and they're not able to sleep. They're very anxious or ramped up. Because they're anxious and ramped up, they might not be eating enough and they might have weight loss. They might still have difficulty concentrating, but theirs is going to present as I'm moving around and fidgeting so much and I'm speaking in a really rapid rate of speech. So that spring onset can look just a little bit different to that fall onset. So I like this picture because it shows how some of the things are similar between seasonal affective disorder versus major depressive disorder. So as you probably figured out already, the symptoms are very similar and overlap. Some of the differences are in timing. So major depressive episodes or disorder can occur any time of the year. They don't typically have a specific time of year that these symptoms occur or worsen. For seasonal affective, we want to see that sort of cycle, if you will, of worsening or onset, usually 2 years. We want to see it at least 2 years in a row to call it and be sure that that's what it is versus a major depressive disorder. However, if people are in the middle of summer and complaining of depressive symptoms, it's less likely that it's a seasonal depression. Sleep, like we talked about for seasonal affective, it is more likely that they are going to be more tired. So they're going to gain sleep. They're going to be tired all the time. They're going to want a nap. They're going to sleep extended hours. Depressive episodes that are not seasonal, they may gain or lose, or they may have mixtures of both, where sometimes they're sleeping more, other times they're not sleeping well at all. Weight gain, we talked about for seasonal depression, tends to be more prominent. That's more likely to occur. You may see that mixture for a major depressive episode. And then we'll get to treatments, but because they share some similarities, we treat them in similar ways. The light therapy at the end, we'll kind of talk about as well. That tends to be more helpful in seasonal depression than year-round depression, because in the summer, sunlight is not really hard to get like it is in the winter sometimes. So it doesn't have the same effect. So what are some of the risk factors for seasonal affective disorder? So one specific thing that is a risk factor is for patients that have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or who have bipolar disorder and have not yet been diagnosed. So people with mental illnesses may be more sensitive. Bipolar disorder, for those that don't know, often cycles between a depressive episode and a more energized state, either mania or hypomania, we call it, but it's basically a more active state. So they're already doing that flip-flop, and so they can be at higher risk for that seasonal shift as well, where you have a little bit of natural depressed mood. It might swing them into a full depression. The spring then, when they are getting sunlight and they have that mood improvement, may suddenly overactivate them into a mania. Women are also 4 times more likely than men, although it can still occur with men. Younger adults, interestingly, are more at risk for seasonal affective disorder versus older adults, where with depressive disorders, that's usually flip-flopped. Family history. So if you have family members that have struggled with seasonal depression, you may be more at risk of noticing that you have seasonal mood changes. Distance from the equator. So we are farther away from the equator than, say, Florida or Texas, where they get lots of sun. They've done some studies. Interestingly, one of the studies I really love was done in Barrow, Alaska, and it was done within indigenous communities there. And they studied, I think it was 111 people, and I think this was back in the 80s. And of the 111 people there, they found that 22.5% suffered from seasonal affective disorder and had fall onset seasonal depression. So that's pretty significant. That's 1 in 5 people. And when they looked at data from studies done in other parts of the world that have more sunlight, are closer to the equator, do not have those long periods of darkness or shortened daytime hours, they did not find those same rates. So they think there's some component to that light-dark cycle that affects our mood significantly. And then low vitamin D levels can sort of cause depressive symptoms in and of their own, and or chronic fatigue, body pain, aches, things like that, mental sort of not being completely mentally sharp. So checking a vitamin D level is often something that we recommend if somebody's coming in with mood symptoms. So SAD by the numbers, I just like to show that this is really common, actually. 350 million people worldwide suffer from depression. Depression is not uncommon. We don't always talk about it or want to recognize it. Sometimes we minimize, like, oh, it's just been a bad week, or I'm just having a bad, month, or, well, these other things happened in my life, so that's all that's going on. But really, depression can be very present and pervasive. So really reaching out to your family members and being open and supportive of having those conversations and saying, I know you have this going on, but you just really seem sad. You really seem like you're struggling. Are you sure you're doing okay? For seasonal affective, as we talked about, it more often affects our younger adults, so 18 to 30-year-olds. And I think sometimes we don't always recognize it in that age group, because sometimes that age group is very energized, and or I have a teenage daughter who I have to be mindful because she can be extremely dramatic at times and highly emotional. And so recognizing what within that is normal for her age versus what might be something more. And then in America, at least 10 million Americans are affected with SAD. 1 to 2 million have mild episodes, but that means that 8 to 9 million have moderate or severe episodes. And it can even require hospitalization for a certain amount of people. 9 out of 10 people with mental health issues experience stigma and discrimination, which really makes it difficult for people to want to recognize that there's maybe an issue and or ask for help, or feel safe that they can ask for help. As I said, family links are super important. 55% of people that have SAD have a family member that has some form of depression. And then, as I said, women are about 4 times more likely than men to have SAD. There are some complications that are listed here, such as alcohol use. We'll kind of get to that again later, but there can be significant complications from not recognizing and treating seasonal affective disorder. So some of the specific causes, we don't have one specific test that we can run in the clinic that says, oh, this is seasonal affective disorder. So sometimes it can be a challenge. There can be multiple factors. So one of the primary causes that we believe attributes to the seasonal mood changes is circadian rhythms. So that's your body's natural clock and hormone response to light and dark. So as we talked about, if you live farther from the equator, you're not going to have as much daylight or light in general throughout the year. So that can be very difficult. When you sit with lights on or on a screen that's emitting light, your body doesn't always recognize it's time to go to sleep. The opposite happens when it's dark and quiet and calm. Your body goes, oh, it's time to go to sleep. So in the winter, when that's happening more, it is reasonable to understand why people oversleep or always feel tired. Even if it's not dark outside, sometimes it's overcast, which is still filtering out some of the sunlight. So that can be a really big thing. Other things that can disrupt the body's circadian rhythm is shift work. So sometimes we'll see in shift workers that work nights and then try to sleep during the day, have difficulty because that light is bombarding their body saying, nope, it's time to be awake. It's not time for you to sleep. And so that can really disrupt the circadian rhythm. Serotonin levels is another thing that can contribute. Serotonin is a chemical in the brain that sends and delivers messages. And it is thought to be depressed or lowered in people that are having seasonal depression. Antidepressant medications most often increase serotonin levels. So the medications we give to treat depression increase serotonin. So when we come to treatment, we'll talk about their role in seasonal affective disorder. Melatonin is sort of your body's natural hormone and chemical that tells your body it's time to slow down and go to sleep. So as we talked about with that circadian rhythm, if you're not kind of making enough melatonin, you're going to be more awake. If you're over making melatonin because of too much darkness and dark signals, you're going to be more tired and sleepy. And then also underlying psychiatric and medical conditions can sometimes cause mood changes. Hormone disorders, thyroid problems. We talked about vitamin D deficiency. So there are some other things that we think can contribute. So this video just kind of talks about like what causes it and what's going on.
Winter is coming, and with it comes the winter blues. You might feel tired and lazy or put on a few pounds. You're basically hibernating, and there's nothing wrong with that. For some people, though, winter is really depressing. Literally. Seasonal affective disorder, often abbreviated to SAD, is a type of clinical depression in which a person experiences depressive episodes at the same time of year for at least 2 years. It's more common in women than men, and weirdly enough, it can happen to people during the summer too, although it's much less common. To be diagnosed with SAD, a person has to meet the criteria of major depressive disorder. But certain symptoms are particularly linked with SAD, including low energy, sleeping more than usual, overeating, and weight gain. People have known that mood can be affected by the changing seasons for a long time. Norwegians have built giant mirrors on mountains to reflect sunlight into shadowy valley towns. And the Danish have embraced the concept of hygge for centuries, which is that feeling of well-being that comes from sitting in front of a fireplace all cozy with friends. But seasonal affective disorder wasn't officially described until 1984, when 29 patients with SAD were identified from over 2,000 people who responded to a newspaper ad put out by a scientist who worked at the National Institutes of Mental Health. The researchers found that SAD usually lasted from October to March for these patients, and that their symptoms were strongly affected by their latitude. Moving farther from the equator caused their depression to kick in earlier, while vacationing closer to it could help reduce symptoms. 11 of the patients in the study were treated with light therapy, where they were instructed to spend around 3 hours in certain fluorescent lights at the beginning and end of their days, and all of them had some improvement. Because SAD is associated with seasonal and latitude changes, and light therapy helps, most researchers hypothesize that it's caused by being exposed to less natural light. But how that becomes depression is more mysterious. Changing light may disrupt circadian rhythms, which play an important role in telling our bodies when to do things like eat and sleep. A few studies have found evidence that differences in the genes that control circadian rhythms might help determine who's more susceptible to SAD. More specifically, melatonin, a hormone that helps regulate sleep and wakefulness, might be a culprit. Your body typically secretes less melatonin when it's light out, which is why you might have been told to avoid screens before bed. Screens mimic natural light and can mess with your body's circadian rhythms. And a 2001 study of 55 SAD patients and 55 volunteers found that the patients secreted melatonin for longer than usual each winter night, while volunteers didn't. According to the researchers, this process is similar to how other mammals, especially the hibernating ones, regulate seasonal changes in their behavior. Some scientists also believe that the neurotransmitter serotonin could play a role in SAD. Serotonin helps regulate mood, sleep, and eating, and is often involved in major depression. Many antidepressants work to increase the amount of serotonin in the brain. Studies have also shown that serotonin production is linked with sunlight exposure, so it could also be part of why SAD is usually a winter thing, although it doesn't explain the rarer summer form of SAD. All of this research seemed to suggest that SAD is a real phenomenon, which is why the findings of a 2016 study of CDC data are interesting. Every year, the CDC conducts a large survey of the U.S. population throughout the year and asks a variety of health questions. And a team of researchers used the 2006 study of just over 34,000 adults to see whether depressive symptoms in general changed throughout the year. But the researchers didn't find anything. People who responded in the winter, during times with less sunlight, or from higher latitudes, didn't seem to have worse depressive symptoms than people who responded under different conditions. This led the researchers to suggest that SAD might not be a valid way to think about depression, and that the results of other studies might have happened because of how they collected data. For instance, it's harder to think back across an entire year than it is to report how you've been feeling in the past 2 weeks, like people did with the CDC survey. But to be fair, the CDC survey wasn't collecting data from the same people over a period of time. The researchers also suggested that if you're asked about seasonal changes in your symptoms, you might be primed to remember changes between seasons. And they point out that SAD has made its way into pop culture, so people might expect to feel more depressed in the winter, and that might affect what they experience. But here's the thing. Even though there might be doubt about seasonal affective disorder as a condition, the symptoms of it can still be treated in multiple ways. Scientists still think that light therapy can work just as well as cognitive behavioral therapy, although expectations can impact how effective both of these treatments are. So, for people who feel extra down during the wintertime, it probably can't hurt to turn that happy light on. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Psych. If you want to learn more about depressive disorders, you can check out our episode on antidepressant misconceptions. And don't forget to go to youtube.com/SciShowPsych and subscribe.
So she presents to me more like a spring with a very high energy, high rate of speech. That's kind of the symptoms you would see if someone had spring onset. Not saying she does, but that's what you would see. So how is seasonal depression treated? Well, there's a couple things, and she mentioned some of these. So light therapy. If anyone's ever taken a vacation to a nice, sunny, warm place in the middle of winter, you've probably noticed it just helps your mood. So you're getting natural sunlight. So making sure during the day when the sun is out or it is light, trying to get yourself some of that exposure. So getting at least 30 minutes of outside time is helpful. Actual light therapy with certain fluorescent bulbs can also be a treatment. Make sure you talk to your doctor though, because depending on the types of bulbs, some people will say, go in the tanning bed, but that comes with risks of skin cancer because it's certain types of UV light versus other types of fluorescence. So if you're going to look at light therapy, either please talk to a healthcare person or make sure you do lots of research in your homework so that you're not causing other problems for yourself. Just naturally try to keep, with light therapy, your environment light and bright and sunny. So having windows open if you have them, making sure you're getting outside, turning on lamps in your home that turn on in the morning before it's even light outside. They actually make sunrise simulating lamps that actually will start dim and slowly get brighter as kind of a natural wake up. So sometimes things like that can be helpful. And then the opposite end is making sure when it's bedtime, putting screens away a couple hours before bed, turning down the lights so that you're, shutting the blinds, trying to kind of send that message to your body. Now is the time for melatonin production. Cognitive behavioral therapy that she discussed, some people know it as psychotherapy, some people just know it as counseling, but it's basically helping, taking how your brain is working and creating new behaviors to help improve symptoms of depression or anxiety. That is something that's available through Ho-Chunk Nation Department of Health, as well as many private counseling agencies in all of our areas. Medications. So medications, especially that target serotonin, can be very helpful. So those are usually antidepressants of some kind. They just help improve that serotonin level for seasonal affective. Excuse me. Some people only take those medications during the season that they're struggling. So they might start them in fall, a couple weeks before they typically get symptoms, and they may stop taking them a couple weeks before spring hits. Other people find that they do better if they just take them year round. So there's lots of options and kind of tailored to the specific person that can happen with medication management. And then things anybody can do at home, not just for seasonal depression, but just healthy mood support in general. Lots of self-care things. So we talked about the sunny, bright environment, getting outside for at least 30 minutes every day, getting regular exercise. So at least 150 minutes, which sounds like a ton for busy working folks, but it can be broken up. So it can be 10 minutes 3 times a day for your work days, or can be done over the weekend. But basically it's 30 minutes 5 times a week. Doesn't have to be all at once. And it can be something as simple as walking. Excuse me. So making sure you're getting regular physical exercise. Recommendations are that you don't exercise vigorously at least 2 hours before bed, because that really kind of ramps up your body, gets your metabolism going, kind of revs you up. So really, if you're going to exercise, try to do it earlier in the day, not as close to bedtime, to help promote healthy sleep. Normalizing sleep patterns. So sleep hygiene. I don't know if anybody's heard that. It's kind of a new buzzword over the last few years, but sleep hygiene is really important for overall health. They've linked sleep problems and people that have trouble sleeping with many, many medical conditions and having increased risk for just about everything. So it's really impactful on your health not to sleep well. So going to bed at the same time every night, turning off screens, not having caffeine or tea or energy drinks late in the afternoon, have them early in the morning, working out earlier in the day, not eating a large meal right before you go to bed, which might cause indigestion. Making sure that your bed is only being used for sleep or intimate relationships, nothing else. If you can't sleep, get up out of bed, go do something else until you're tired, then try to lay down again, because you want your brain to associate bed with sleep so that it does produce those chemicals you need it to when it's time to sleep. Getting up at the same time every morning, trying not to nap during the day, all those things can help. Stress management. Stress can worsen anxiety and depression symptoms, regardless of the season. So really making sure you're managing your stress, finding those positive outlets, finding things to do that make you feel good and help you relax. And socialization. So not withdrawing and isolating socially. And I don't mean socialize like you have to go to a concert with 1,000 people, but staying in contact with your close friends and family, going to have a coffee date one-on-one with someone, going into a bookstore to read a book if that's what you like to do, but just not isolating by yourself at home. So finding those ways to socialize and connect that are meaningful to you. So this kind of breaks down if you have sort of mild symptoms of seasonal affective. So that's kind of like feeling down, but you're still doing the things you need to. Maybe you're having a little trouble sleeping, but it's not every night. Maybe you're, kind of tired and don't have a lot of energy or motivation, but you're still getting up and going to work and doing the things you need to. Those are more mild symptoms. So that's where some of those things we talked about, finding something you enjoy, get some sunlight in your life, go outside, eat healthy, get exercise, all those things can be helpful. If you're noticing that you have more severe symptoms, like you are starting to withdraw socially, you're oversleeping, but you're still tired, you're gaining weight, you're having a lot of bad food cravings, or you're having cravings to use substances to try to get to sleep or to make you feel better, or your work performance is starting to suffer. Those are times it's really recommended that you seek professional help because it's clearly impacting your function. Sometimes our family members in the middle of it are just trying to survive day to day, and they don't even see it happening. So, really watching out for our friends and family members, and also trying to recognize when they may be struggling and say, hey, I noticed these things. Can I help you make an appointment to talk to your doctor? Or can I go to the park and sit outside in the sun with you? Or, right, sometimes people in the mix just don't even recognize they're just trying to get through that day. So, you know, I really recommend you watch out for those you love, not just kind of how you're doing. And then, as we talked about, there can be some significant complications of untreated and uncontrolled seasonal depression. So people can become socially withdrawn. We saw this a lot during COVID. When you cut off people's sense of connection and community and ability to engage with others, it is very challenging for mood, especially if someone already has a predisposition to a mood disorder. We are social beings back thousands and thousands since we were created. We have been meant to be around other people in some way, shape, or form. So really seeing someone pull away is worrisome. Problems at school or work. If somebody is trying to work and their depression is getting bad and they're missing work, some of our entities have really strict attendance policies. If you lose a job, now you've added even more stress, because now how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to have health insurance? How am I going to provide for my family? Like, and it just spirals and gets even worse. So, you know, when depression starts impacting day-to-day function, it really is a big deal. Substance use. So that study that was done in Barrow, Alaska, in the indigenous community with those high rates, there's also, it was found that they had much higher rates of alcohol use and other substances. So not saying one necessarily caused the other, but they are related, and we know that. So people, if they are suffering in their mood, are much more likely to then use alcohol, and the more alcohol someone consumes, the more likely they are to have mood challenges. So it can get into a really bad feedback loop. And then also, depression can lead to suicide. Most of us have been touched by suicide in some way, shape, or form. And so, you know, it's really important to recognize that people may not let you know right away. So checking on people, asking. Renelle, I know, does QPR training. So if you have not, I strongly recommend that, so that, you know, we don't ever want someone to feel so hopeless and helpless that they think the only option is to end their life. That has permanent and rippling effects. So depression can be a really big thing, even if it is only in the winter. So there's some references. I'm a little early, but does anybody have any questions or feedback for me, or things you want to talk about while you have me available?
Well, thank you for the QPR plug. We are offering QPR next week, Wednesday, during PIP at D1CC at noon, correct, Jamie?
Yes.
Noon.
7:45
Wednesday?
is lunch and noon is training.
I would have my sunlight for you guys, but if I open this, I don't think any of us can see. So like, I'll send some sunshine and soak it up. It's not really sunny, it's snowing, but it's nice and bright, so.
Does anybody online have any questions?
Well, hearing none, Pinagigi Jen, perfect cold winter weathery day to talk about seasonal affective disorder. And thank you everybody for joining us today. As a reminder, this session is recorded and will be available on the Department of Health website and Facebook page. We look forward to seeing you at our next session on Wednesday, February 19th from 1 to 2 p.m. We'll be joined by Bethany Redbird from Ho-Chunk Nation School Community Relations. We welcome all feedback related to this series. If you have a topic that you would like to learn more about, or if you'd like to present on a topic, please reach out to Jamie and I. And I noticed she has already put our contact information in the chat. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Have a great afternoon,
Great
everyone.
day. Stay warm.